transfigures you and me. had a rather difficult time after we were married, like so many of the young couples who may be listening to us. I practiced law. She continued to teach school. I should say this, that Pat doesn't have a mink coat, but she does have a respectable Republican cloth coat.
She was a woman of great intelligence, great understanding.
Well, I remember him as always being a very gracious, very charming man. I told him there's something that happened about the children and that you were very proud of them. He would take my hand in both of his and almost had tears in his eyes. He was very warm, very affectionate. I mean, he adored his family, as you know, was devoted to Pat.
I remember my old man. I think that they would have called him sort of a little man, a common man. He didn't consider himself that way. You know what he was? He was a streetcar motorman first, and then he was a farmer, and then he had a lemon ranch. It was the poorest lemon ranch in California, I can assure you. He sold it before they found oil in it. And then he was a grocer. But he was a great man. Nobody will ever write a book, probably, about my mother. Well, I guess all of you would say this about your mother. My mother was a saint. And I think of her, 2 boys dying of tuberculosis, nursing 4 others in order that she could take care of my older brother for 3 years in Arizona, and seeing each of them die. And when they died, it was like one of her own. Yes, she will have no books written about her. But she was a saint.
If he made mistakes, it was in the interest of doing something better for the world, and trying to defend those positions that he held. But detractors are always out there. There's always a few, and I feel sorry for them. They don't understand the man. They don't know him. Certainly not as well as I do.
I conducted that funeral, and at that time I was with him, and he felt a tremendous sense of loss because he depended on Pat. She was a very strong woman, and she never did leave him or turn her back on him in any of the controversial things he was involved in. She stuck with him, and he leaned on her and depended on her.
Again, I say the sorrow and the best wishes of the American people are with President Nixon's family. We thank them, and our prayers are with them.
I thought he was wonderful for the country. I thought he did a magnificent job as a president. He just blew it on Watergate.
I think Richard Nixon is one of the greatest presidents that we ever had. IQ-wise, it's the second highest IQ, Thomas Jefferson being first, the brilliant president. Did a lot in foreign affairs, and he'll go down in history as a great man.
I think that he maybe was trying too hard to do what he wanted to do, and maybe stepped over some boundaries he shouldn't have. But he's done a lot to make up for it, I think.
I think history will be kinder to Richard Nixon than possibly present-day politicians and biographers are or have been. I think Watergate will be looked on as a small blip. The career of Richard Nixon, the tremendous leadership that he gave not only to your country but to the free world in time of need, I think will be looked on with great kindness in the future.
It was kind of the end of an era, and I came mainly because during my lifetime I feel like he's been the greatest American during that time.
I think now we should look to the future. And I think in that case, what I have to say in the future, what I have said in the past, about a new relationship with the Soviet Union, a new relationship with China.
Right after the war, the Persian Gulf War, there was euphoria. And we thought, now we have a new world. We're not going to have any aggressors because we have paid them off in this case and we have deterred them. And with the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union, we're going to have an entirely new world there as well. But the more things change, the more they remain the same insofar as stability is concerned. The hopes for peace, the hopes for progress, the hopes for freedom are infinitely greater than they were before these recent developments. But on the other hand, we have to realize that we're moving into uncharted waters, that we have instability around the world. What we have to do is to seize the moment, to be sure that this unstable situation does not result in chaos and eventually in armed conflicts. That can be done.
Let us always make sure for the young Americans that the road ahead is never blocked by prejudice or ignorance or poverty, and that he or she can go as hard as his or her talents will take them. That is the goal we want for young Americans today. And because there are so many young people here today, may I add a word to you. I believe in the American dream because I have seen it come true in my own life. And I want you to know that as far as you're concerned, I want your dreams to come true as well.
How do you want to be remembered?
I would say that my goal at this late stage in my life is to be remembered as one who made a difference, particularly in the areas in which I've been primarily interested, the areas of foreign policy, peace, freedom, free markets, democracy around the world. Made a difference in moving the world a bit, and the United States, of course, in that direction. Because what helps the rest of the world helps us.
So many people out there that absolutely adored him. And you know what the shame of it is he didn't know it. He absolutely didn't know it. He was in a shell. He really felt that to go out his front door, rather than the people, knowing that people adored him, he really was looking over his shoulder for the person to say something.
History will show that in character and in integrity and the type of political openness that Nixon presented for our country, the type of doors that he opened for us overseas with China, that history would be far, far kinder if we would remember him for those accomplishments, unlike our current president.
I remember him through Watergate, and I also remember that because I'm Chinese, he was really great for foreign policy, and my grandmother really loved him, just thought he was the greatest. Thought it was just a shame that he went through Watergate.
My view changed drastically last June at the passing of his wife, and seeing him almost in tears about broke my heart, and just really showed a human side of him that I'll always remember now as the main thing in his life.
The Watergate deal, that should be passed. I don't think the media should ever key on it again. Richard Nixon, and hundreds of thousands of lives in Vietnam were saved because of him, and mine's one of them.
It's a sad time, yet a happy time. He led a very full life. 81 years is a long time. I certainly send my condolences to the family. You know, like I say, I think our country is a better place because of President Nixon.
Growing up in the 70s in a Republican family, he was the apple of my father's eye until Watergate, basically, but he will be missed, and he was a good president.
President Nixon opened his memoirs with a simple sentence. I was born in a house my father built. Today we can look back at this little house and still imagine a young boy sitting by the window of the attic he shared with his three brothers, looking out to a world he could then himself only imagine. From those humble roots, as from so many humble beginnings in this country, grew the force of a driving dream. A dream that led to the remarkable journey that ends here today, where it all began. Beside the same tiny home, mail-ordered from back east, near this towering oak tree, which back then was a mere seedling. President Nixon's journey across the American landscape mirrored that of his entire nation in this remarkable century. His life was bound up with the striving of our whole people, with our crises and our triumphs. When he became president, he took on challenges here at home on matters from cancer research to environmental protection, putting the power of the federal government where Republicans and Democrats had neglected to put it in the past. In foreign policy, he came to the presidency at a time in our history when Americans were tempted to say we had had enough of the world. Instead, he knew we had to reach out to old friends and old enemies alike. He would not allow America to quit the world. Remarkably, he wrote 9 of his 10 books after he left the presidency, working his way back into the arena he so loved by writing and thinking and engaging us in his dialogue. For the past year, even in the final weeks of his life, he gave me his wise counsel, especially with regard to Russia. One thing in particular left a profound impression on me. Though this man was in his 9th decade, he had an incredibly sharp and vigorous and rigorous mind. As a public man, he always seemed to believe the greatest sin was remaining passive in the face of challenges, and he never stopped living by that creed. He gave of himself with intelligence and energy and devotion to duty, and his entire country owes him a debt of gratitude for that service. Oh yes, he knew great controversy amid defeat as well as victory. He made mistakes, and they, like his accomplishments, are part of his life and record. But the enduring lesson of Richard Nixon is that he never gave up being part of the action and passion of his times. He said many times that unless a person has a goal, a new mountain to climb, his spirit will die. Well, based on our last phone conversation and the letter he wrote me just a month ago, I can say that his spirit was very much alive to the very end. That is a great tribute to him, to his wonderful wife, Pat, to his children and to his grandchildren, whose love he so depended on, and whose love he returned in full measure. Today is a day for his family, his friends, and his nation to remember President Nixon's life in totality. To them, let us say, may the day of judging President Nixon on anything less than his entire life and career come to a close. May we heed his call to maintain the will and the wisdom to build on America's greatest gift, its freedom, to lead a world full of difficulty to the just and lasting peace he dreamed of. As it is written in the words of a hymn I heard in my church last Sunday, grant that I may realize that the trifling of life creates differences, but that in the higher things we are all one. In the twilight of his life, President Nixon knew that lesson well. It is, I feel certain, a faith he would want us all to keep. And so, on behalf of all four former presidents who are here, President Ford, President Carter, President Reagan, President Bush, and on behalf of a grateful nation, we bid farewell to Richard Milhous Nixon.
Now the remains of Richard Nixon will be taken to the small home in which he was born, to the back, to a plot near where Pat Nixon was buried less than a year ago for final interment. His immediate family, Tricia and Julie and their husbands and children, his brother Ed Nixon, and the former presidents will all accompany the casket to the final burial, along with Governor Pete Wilson, Senator Bob Dole, and former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. is here with me now and helped him with his memoirs once he left office after Watergate. And Frank, there's that haunting paragraph at the end of 6 Crises that he wrote at the end of his loss to to John Kennedy in 1960, when he said that when he was a small boy and living in this home, he would listen to the train whistles in the night and dream of far-off places.
He talked about, he remembered the engineer. His name was Everett Barnum, who used to wave at the boys when the train went through, and that was his ambition, to be an engineer for the first several years of his life.
As a boy here at this place with Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd,